The storm had come down from the Sierra Nevada without warning, and Ethan Lancaster found the woman half frozen in his barn when he went to check on his horses just after midnight. Her lips were blue, her dark hair matted with snow and ice, and she was barely conscious as she huddled between two bales of hay, shaking so violently that he could hear her teeth chattering from 10 feet away. He did not hesitate. In one swift motion, he scooped her into his arms, feeling how light she was, how her body trembled against his chest as he carried her through the blizzard toward his small ranch house. The wind howled around them as he kicked open the door, shouldering his way inside with his precious cargo. The fire in the hearth had burned down to embers, and he laid her carefully on the rug before it, quickly adding wood and stoking the flames until they roared back to life. She was still shivering, her eyes fluttering but not quite focusing, and he knew hypothermia when he saw it. He had lost a fellow ranch hand to the cold 3 winters back, and he would not let this woman suffer the same fate. "Stay with me," he said firmly, though he doubted she could hear him. "You are going to be all right." He pulled off her soaking wet cloak and the layers beneath, his movements quick and efficient, keeping his eyes averted as much as possible to preserve her dignity. Her dress was threadbare and offered little protection against the elements. He wrapped her in every blanket he owned, then heated water on the stove and carefully helped her drink small sips of warm broth. Her shivering began to ease after what felt like hours, and finally, her eyes opened fully. They were the most striking shade of green he had ever seen, like new spring grass after rain, and they looked at him with confusion and fear. "Where am I?" Her voice was hoarse, barely more than a whisper. "My ranch, just outside Lone Pine, California," Ethan said gently. "I found you in my barn." "What were you doing out in a storm like this?" She tried to sit up, wincing at the effort. "I was traveling. My wagon overturned about a mile back. I tried to unhitch the horse, but he ran off. I saw your barn and thought I could wait out the storm there. I must have fallen asleep." "You nearly froze to death," he said bluntly. "Another hour and I would have found a corpse." She closed her eyes, and he saw tears slip down her cheeks. "I am sorry for the intrusion. I will leave as soon as the storm passes." "You will do no such thing," Ethan said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You are in no condition to travel, and from the sound of that wind, this storm is not letting up any time soon. You will stay here until you are well enough to move and until the weather clears. I insist." She looked at him for a long moment, seeming to assess whether she could trust him. He understood her caution. A woman alone with a strange man in the middle of nowhere had every reason to be wary, but something in his expression must have reassured her, because she nodded slowly. "Thank you," she whispered. "My name is Theodora Parker." "Ethan Lancaster," he replied. "And you are welcome, Miss Parker. Now you need to rest. I will sleep in the chair here by the fire to make sure it does not go out. You take the bed." "I cannot take your bed," she protested weakly. "You can and you will," he said firmly. "I have slept in far worse places than a comfortable chair." He helped her to her feet, supporting her weight as he guided her to the bedroom. She sank onto the mattress gratefully, and he pulled the quilts up around her chin. Within moments, exhaustion claimed her, and she was asleep. Ethan returned to the main room, settling into his chair and staring into the flames. He wondered what circumstances had brought a woman like her out into the wilderness alone, in the dead of winter. It was December of 1882, and Lone Pine was hardly a thriving metropolis. Most people avoided this area in winter unless they had no other choice. The storm raged for 3 days straight, dumping nearly 4 feet of snow on the high desert valley. Ethan spent those days caring for Theodora, bringing her hot meals and checking on her frequently to ensure she was recovering. She slept most of the first 2 days, her body demanding rest after her ordeal. On the third day, she was finally strong enough to sit up and take her meals at the small table in the main room. "You have been very kind," she said as she sipped the coffee he had brewed. "I do not know how I can ever repay you." "No repayment necessary," Ethan said, settling into the chair across from her. "Out here, we help each other. It is the only way to survive." She smiled, and he was struck by how beautiful she was when she was not half dead from cold. Her dark hair fell in waves past her shoulders, and her green eyes held an intelligence and warmth that drew him in despite himself. He had been alone on this ranch for 2 years, ever since he had saved up enough money from his days as a ranch hand to buy his own small spread. He had told himself he preferred the solitude, but looking at Theodora across the table, he realized how much he had missed having someone to talk to. "Where were you headed when your wagon overturned?" he asked. Her smile faded, and she looked down at her cup. "I was running away, if I am being honest. I was engaged to be married back in Independence, Missouri. My father arranged the match without consulting me. The man was twice my age and had a reputation for cruelty. I could not go through with it. So I packed what little I owned and headed west, hoping to start a new life somewhere far from my father's reach." Ethan felt a surge of anger on her behalf. "Your father had no right to force you into such a marriage." "He believed he did," Theodora said quietly. "In his eyes, I was property to be disposed of as he saw fit. He had debts, you see, and the marriage would have settled them. When I left, I disgraced him. He will be furious when he discovers I am gone." "How old are you?" Ethan asked. 22, she replied. "Old enough to know my own mind, but not old enough, apparently, to have any say in my future." "You are plenty old enough," Ethan said firmly. "And you were right to leave. No one should be forced into a marriage they do not want." She looked up at him, gratitude shining in her eyes. "Thank you for saying that. Most men would think I was being foolish or disobedient." "Then most men are idiots," Ethan said, and was rewarded with a genuine laugh from her. The sound was like music, bright and warm in the small room. Over the next few days, as Theodora recovered her strength and the snow began to melt, they fell into an easy companionship. She helped him with cooking and mending, insisting that she could not simply sit idle while he worked. He told her about his life, about growing up on a ranch in Texas before his parents died of fever when he was 16. He had worked as a cowboy for various outfits, saving every penny until he could afford his own place. He was 26 now, and this ranch, small as it was, represented everything he had worked for. Theodora told him about her childhood in Missouri, about her mother who had died when she was young, and her father who had grown increasingly bitter and controlling as the years passed. She had always loved to read and had dreamed of becoming a teacher, but her father had forbidden it, saying it was not a suitable occupation for a woman of her station. The more she talked, the more Ethan understood why she had fled, and the more he admired her courage. 2 weeks after he had found her in his barn, Ethan realized he was falling in love with her. The realization came to him one morning as he watched her kneading bread dough at the kitchen counter, humming softly to herself. The sunlight streaming through the window caught in her hair, turning it almost golden, and his heart clenched in his chest. He had never felt this way about anyone before, this fierce desire to protect and cherish, combined with a deep respect for her strength and independence. But he said nothing. She was a guest in his home, dependent on his hospitality. He would not take advantage of her situation by declaring feelings she might not return. Instead, he resolved to simply enjoy her company for as long as she chose to stay, and to help her move on to wherever she wanted to go when the time came. Theodora, for her part, was experiencing her own revelation. She found herself looking forward to Ethan's return each evening when he came in from tending the animals or repairing fences. She loved the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, the deep rumble of his laugh, the gentleness in his hands despite their roughness from hard work. She had never met a man who treated her as an equal, who listened to her opinions and valued her thoughts. With Ethan, she felt seen in a way she never had before, but she too remained silent, afraid that speaking her feelings aloud would shatter the fragile peace they had built together. She told herself that she was being practical, that she needed to find her own way in the world before she could even think about romance. She had fled one man who wanted to control her life. She would not immediately bind herself to another, no matter how kind he might be. As January turned to February, the snow continued to melt, and the days grew incrementally longer. Ethan taught Theodora to ride his spare horse, a gentle mare named Daisy. They rode together across his land, and he showed her the boundaries of his property, the creek that ran through it in spring, the stand of pines that gave the nearby town its name. She was a quick learner, and soon rode with confidence, her laughter ringing out across the valley as they raced back to the house. One afternoon, they rode into Lone Pine proper so Theodora could purchase some supplies and see if there was any work available. The town was small, just a main street with a general store, a saloon, a church, and a handful of other buildings. The proprietor of the general store, a kind woman named Martha Chen, whose parents had come from China to work on the railroads, took an immediate liking to Theodora. "We could use someone to help in the store a few days a week," Martha said after they had talked for a while. "My husband and I are getting older and the work is becoming too much. The pay is not much, but it is honest work." Theodora accepted gratefully, and they arranged for her to start the following week. As they rode back to the ranch, Ethan tried to ignore the sinking feeling in his chest. If Theodora was finding work in town, it meant she was planning to stay in the area, but also that she was establishing her independence. She would not need to rely on him much longer. That evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, Theodora broached the subject he had been dreading. "I cannot stay here indefinitely," she said softly. "You have been more than generous, but I need to find a place of my own. Martha mentioned that there is a boarding house in town. I thought I might inquire about a room there once I have earned a bit of money." Ethan stared into the fire, choosing his words carefully. "You are welcome to stay here as long as you like. I have the space and I have enjoyed your company." "I have enjoyed yours as well," Theodora said, and he heard something in her voice that made him look up. Her eyes met his, and for a moment, the air between them seemed charged with unspoken words. "But people will talk, Ethan. A single woman living with a single man with no chaperone, it would damage both our reputations." He knew she was right, but the thought of coming home to an empty house again, of eating meals alone and spending his evenings in silence, filled him with a loneliness he had not felt in years. What if we gave them nothing to talk about? He heard himself say, and then wondered if he had gone mad. But now that the words were out, he found he could not stop. "What if you were not just staying here, but living here as my wife?" Theodora's eyes went wide, and he rushed on before she could speak. "I know it is sudden. I know you barely know me. But Theodora, these past weeks with you have been the happiest I can remember. I wake up looking forward to the day because you are in it. I find myself thinking of things I want to tell you, things I want to show you. I love the sound of your laugh and the way you are not afraid to speak your mind. I love your courage and your kindness. I am in love with you, and I think I have been since the first moment I saw you shivering in my barn." He took a breath, his heart pounding. I am not asking you to replace one unwanted marriage with another. I would never force you or pressure you. But if there is any chance that you might feel the same way, or that you might come to feel that way, I am asking you to consider staying, not as a guest or a housekeeper, but as my partner in building this life. Marry me, Theodora. Not because you have nowhere else to go, but because you want to be here with me. The silence that followed felt like it lasted an eternity. Theodora sat perfectly still, her hands clasped in her lap, her expression unreadable. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "I thought I was the only one feeling this way," she whispered. "I have been falling in love with you too, Ethan, but I was so afraid. Afraid that you were just being kind, that you saw me as an obligation. Afraid that I was being foolish, jumping from one bad situation into something I did not fully understand." She reached across the small space between them and took his hand. "But this does not feel like my father trying to sell me off to settle his debts. This does not feel like being trapped. When I am with you, I feel free. I feel like I can be myself, like my thoughts and feelings matter. You make me laugh and you make me feel safe, and when you look at me, I feel seen in a way I never have before." Tears were streaming down her face now, and Ethan moved from his chair to kneel beside hers, taking both her hands in his. "Yes," she said, smiling through her tears. "Yes, I will marry you, Ethan Lancaster. Not because I have nowhere else to go, but because there is nowhere else I want to be." He pulled her into his arms then, holding her close as relief and joy flooded through him. She wrapped her arms around his neck, and when they pulled back enough to look at each other, he cupped her face gently in his hands. "May I kiss you?" he asked softly. In answer, she closed the distance between them, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that was sweet and tender and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless and smiling. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Lone Pine, with Martha Chen and her husband David as witnesses. The preacher, a jovial man named Reverend Thomas, seemed delighted to officiate a wedding that was clearly based on genuine affection rather than mere convenience. Theodora wore a simple but pretty dress that Martha had helped her sew from fabric they had purchased at the store. Ethan wore his best clothes, which were still fairly worn but clean and pressed. As they exchanged vows, promising to love and cherish each other for as long as they both lived, Ethan felt a sense of rightness settle over him. This woman, who had come into his life by chance during a blizzard, was meant to be his. He saw his own certainty reflected in Theodora's eyes as she said, "I do," her voice clear and strong. The kiss they shared as husband and wife was witnessed by the small gathering of townspeople who had come out of curiosity and stayed out of genuine good wishes. There was something about their story, about a woman fleeing an unwanted marriage and finding love with the cowboy who had saved her from freezing to death, that captured the romantic imagination of the community. That night, back at the ranch that was now truly their home, Ethan carried Theodora over the threshold. She laughed in delight as he set her down gently, and they stood in the middle of the main room, suddenly shy with each other now that they were truly alone as man and wife. "I never thought I would be here," Theodora said softly. 3 months ago I was in Missouri, terrified and desperate. I thought I was running toward nothing, just away from something terrible. But I was running toward you, toward this life. I just did not know it yet." Ethan drew her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "I spent so long telling myself I did not need anyone, that I was content alone. But I was just waiting for you. I would go through 100 blizzards if it meant finding you in my barn at the end of it." She tilted her head back to look up at him. "Take me to bed, husband." He did, and they spent their first night as a married couple learning each other in the darkness, their whispers and soft laughter mingling with the crackling of the fire in the next room. Everything felt new and wonderful and slightly overwhelming, but they faced it together, with tenderness and patience and growing confidence. The months that followed were full of hard work, but also deep contentment. Spring came to the valley, bringing with it wildflowers and the rushing sound of snowmelt in the creek. Theodora continued to work at the general store 2 days a week, enjoying the interaction with the townspeople and the independence of earning her own money, even though Ethan insisted she did not need to. He respected her desire to contribute and never questioned her choices. They worked side by side on the ranch, repairing the barn roof that had taken damage during the winter storms, planting a vegetable garden, and caring for the horses and the small herd of cattle Ethan was slowly building. Theodora proved to be a quick learner and a hard worker, and Ethan found himself constantly amazed by her determination and resilience. In June, they received unexpected news. A letter arrived addressed to Theodora Parker Lancaster, forwarded through the general store from Independence. It was from her cousin Rebecca, whom Theodora had mentioned occasionally as one of the few family members she regretted leaving behind. Theodora's hands shook as she opened it, afraid of what it might contain. But as she read, her expression shifted from apprehension to relief, and then to joy. "My father called off the search for me," she said, looking up at Ethan with shining eyes. "Rebecca writes that after I left, the man I was supposed to marry found another bride, a wealthy widow who could settle my father's debts more efficiently than I could have. My father told everyone I had gone to live with distant relatives in California to save face. He has no interest in dragging me back now that the marriage alliance is no longer necessary." She laughed, a sound of pure relief. "I am free, Ethan, truly free. He does not want me back, which means he cannot force me to return or try to dissolve this marriage. Rebecca sends her congratulations and says she is happy for me." Ethan pulled her into his arms, feeling the tension he had not even realized he was carrying finally release. He had been prepared to defend Theodora against anyone who tried to take her away, but he was glad it would not come to that. "You were always free," he murmured into her hair, "but I am glad you no longer have to look over your shoulder." Summer passed in a blur of long, hot days and cool nights. They attended church socials and town gatherings, slowly becoming woven into the fabric of the Lone Pine community. Theodora struck up friendships with several of the women in town, and Ethan found himself socializing more than he had in years, drawn out of his solitary habits by his wife's natural warmth. In August, Theodora began to suspect she might be pregnant. She waited until she was certain before telling Ethan, wanting to be sure before she got his hopes up. When she finally shared the news one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He stared at her for a long moment, his expression stunned, and then a grin spread across his face that was so wide and joyful it made her heart sing. He swept her up in his arms, spinning her around carefully before setting her down and dropping to his knees to place his hands gently on her still flat stomach. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "We are going to have a baby." "We are," she confirmed, running her fingers through his dark hair. "Are you happy?" He looked up at her and she saw tears in his eyes. "Happy does not even begin to cover it, Theodora. You have given me so much already. A home that feels like a home instead of just a place to sleep. A reason to come in from the fields at the end of the day. And now this. I never imagined I would be this blessed." The pregnancy was not easy. Theodora suffered from terrible morning sickness for the first few months, and Ethan hovered anxiously, doing everything he could to make her comfortable. She found his concern endearing even when it bordered on overprotective, and she gently but firmly reminded him that women had been having babies since the beginning of time. "I know," he said, looking sheepish, "but those were other women. This is you, and this is our baby, and I cannot help but worry." Martha Chen, who had raised 4 children of her own, became an invaluable source of advice and support. She checked on Theodora regularly and assured Ethan that everything was progressing normally. As winter approached once more, Theodora's belly grew round and prominent, and she found herself moving more slowly, tiring more easily. They spent the evenings preparing for the baby's arrival. Ethan built a cradle from pine wood, sanding it smooth and carving little stars into the headboard. Theodora sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her needle flying as she worked. They talked about names and about what kind of parents they wanted to be, about the values they wanted to instill, and the life they wanted to build for their child. "I want our children to know they are loved unconditionally," Theodora said one night as she folded a small nightgown. "I want them to know that their happiness matters, that their dreams are valid, that they have a choice in how they live their lives." "They will know," Ethan promised. "We will make sure of it." On a cold March night in 1884, as another storm howled outside, Theodora went into labor. Ethan rode through the blizzard to fetch Martha, his heart in his throat as he pushed his horse as fast as he dared through the snow. Martha gathered her supplies and climbed up behind him, and they made the treacherous journey back to the ranch. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Ethan paced the main room, flinching every time he heard Theodora cry out, feeling utterly helpless. Martha emerged periodically to give him updates and to fetch supplies, her calm presence the only thing keeping him from losing his mind entirely. Finally, as the storm began to clear and weak sunlight filtered through the windows, he heard a new sound. A baby's cry, high and indignant. He held his breath until Martha appeared in the bedroom doorway, smiling broadly. "You have a son," she said, "and your wife is tired but doing well. Come and meet your boy." Ethan entered the bedroom on shaking legs. Theodora lay propped up against the pillows, her hair damp with sweat, her face exhausted but radiant. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in one of the blankets she had sewn. As Ethan approached, she pulled back the blanket to reveal a tiny red face, eyes squeezed shut, mouth open in another demanding wail. "He has your voice," Theodora said with a tired laugh, loud and impossible to ignore. Ethan sat carefully on the edge of the bed, reaching out a tentative finger to touch his son's tiny hand. Immediately, the baby's fingers closed around his, gripping with surprising strength. The simple gesture struck Ethan to his core, and tears spilled down his cheeks. "He is perfect," he whispered. "You are perfect. I love you both so much." "I love you too," Theodora said softly. "What should we name him?" They had discussed several options, but now, looking at his son, Ethan knew exactly what felt right. "Samuel," he said. "After my father, Samuel Lancaster." Theodora smiled. "Samuel, it is perfect." The first months of Samuel's life were a blur of sleepless nights and constant worry. Every sniffle, every unusual cry sent Ethan into a panic, but Theodora, despite being a first-time mother, seemed to have a natural instinct for what the baby needed. They took turns walking the floor with Samuel when he was fussy, and they marveled together at every small milestone, every smile and coo. As Samuel grew from an infant into a chubby, active baby, the ranch prospered. Ethan's cattle herd increased, and he was able to hire a young man named Michael Stevens to help with the heavy work. This gave Ethan more time to spend with his family, time he treasured beyond measure. Theodora had stopped working at the general store after Samuel was born, but she remained close friends with Martha and the other women in town. The ranch house was frequently filled with visitors, and Samuel was doted on by everyone who met him. He was a happy, curious child with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes, and he brought joy to everyone around him. When Samuel was 2 years old, Theodora discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, though she still had bouts of sickness and exhaustion. Ethan was more prepared this time, less prone to panic, though he still worried constantly about her health. Their second child, a daughter they named Grace, was born in the autumn of 1886, during the golden season when the cottonwoods turned yellow and the air smelled of wood smoke and coming winter. Her birth was quicker and less traumatic than Samuel's had been, and she emerged with a full head of dark hair and lungs that proved she was every bit as strong-willed as her older brother. Samuel was fascinated by his baby sister, constantly wanting to help care for her, to hold her and show her his toys. Ethan and Theodora supervised carefully, teaching him to be gentle, and they watched with full hearts as their son learned to be a protective older brother. Life settled into a rhythm that felt right. The seasons passed in their eternal cycle, each bringing its own tasks and challenges. They added onto the house, building an additional bedroom for the children and expanding the kitchen. Ethan built Theodora a small porch off the back of the house, where she could sit and watch the children play while she worked on her mending, or simply enjoyed a quiet moment. The ranch continued to grow. Ethan's reputation as a fair and honest man spread, and he began to get contracts to supply beef to the nearby mining camps and to the growing town of Bishop to the north. The money allowed them to make improvements and to save for the children's future. Theodora started a small school in town, teaching children whose parents could not afford to send them to the larger schools in Bishop. She held classes 3 afternoons a week in the back room of the general store, and she found deep satisfaction in sharing her love of learning with the next generation. In 1889, when Samuel was 5 and Grace was 3, Theodora gave birth to their third child, another boy they named Daniel. He was a quiet baby, content to watch the world with solemn dark eyes, and he seemed to bring a sense of peace to the family. Samuel and Grace adored him, and Ethan often came in from the fields to find all 3 children piled together, with Samuel reading aloud from one of the books Theodora had treasured since her own childhood. The years passed swiftly, each one bringing new joys and challenges. Samuel grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved helping his father on the ranch and showed an aptitude for working with animals. Grace was bright and spirited, always asking questions and getting into mischief. Daniel, true to his early nature, was the peacemaker of the family, able to calm his siblings with a smile or a gentle word. Ethan and Theodora watched their children grow with a mixture of pride and bittersweet awareness of how quickly time was passing. They stole moments alone when they could, riding out together after the children were asleep, sitting on the porch under the stars and talking about their dreams and plans. Their love had only deepened with time, tempered by shared struggles and strengthened by the life they had built together. One evening in the spring of 1895, as they sat together watching the sunset paint the mountains pink and gold, Theodora leaned her head on Ethan's shoulder with a contented sigh. "You remember the night you found me?" she asked. "Every detail," Ethan replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "You were shivering so hard I thought you might shake apart. Your lips were blue and you could barely speak. I was terrified I would not be able to warm you in time." "I was so cold I could not feel my fingers or toes," Theodora said. "I thought I was going to die in that barn, alone and frozen, And then you appeared like something out of a dream and you saved me." "You saved yourself," Ethan corrected gently. "You had the courage to run from a life that would have destroyed you. You survived that blizzard and made it to my barn. I just provided the blankets and the fire." Theodora laughed softly. "You provided so much more than that. You gave me a home, a family, a life I never dared to dream about. You gave me love and respect and partnership. You gave me everything, Ethan." He took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "You gave me everything too. Before you, I was just existing, going through the motions. You brought color and warmth and meaning to my life. You gave me a reason to build something lasting, not just for myself, but for our children and their children." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. From inside the house, they could hear the children playing, their laughter and voices a familiar and beloved soundtrack. "I cannot imagine what my life would have been if I had not run that night," Theodora said quietly. "If I had gone through with that marriage, if I had stayed in Missouri, I would have been so miserable. And I would have stayed alone, never knowing what I was missing," Ethan added. "It is strange to think that the worst blizzard this valley had seen in a decade was the best thing that ever happened to both of us." "Fate," Theodora said with a smile, "or providence, or just pure luck. Whatever it was, I am grateful for it every single day." As the years continued to unfold, the Lancaster family became a fixture in Lone Pine. Samuel, as he entered his teenage years, took on more responsibility on the ranch, working alongside his father with increasing skill and confidence. He was courting a sweet girl from town named Alice Morrison, and Ethan and Theodora could see marriage in their not-too-distant future. Grace, at 12, was already showing signs of following in her mother's footsteps. She loved books and learning, and she often helped Theodora with the school in town, assisting the younger children with their reading. She had announced her intention to become a teacher herself, and Theodora was determined to help her daughter achieve that dream. Daniel, at 9, was discovering a love of music. A traveling preacher had passed through town with a battered old guitar, and Daniel had been entranced. Ethan had scraped together the money to buy the instrument from the man, and Daniel practiced for hours every day, his natural talent evident even to his musically inexperienced parents. In 1898, Theodora received another letter from her cousin Rebecca. This one brought news that her father had passed away peacefully in his sleep. Theodora felt a complex mix of emotions at the news. She had not seen or spoken to her father in over 15 years, and the wounds he had inflicted had healed into scars. She felt sadness for the relationship they had never had, but she also felt a sense of closure. "Are you all right?" Ethan asked as she folded the letter carefully. "I am," she said, and was surprised to find it was true. "I forgave him a long time ago, not for his sake but for mine. I could not carry that anger and resentment and still be the mother and wife I wanted to be, but I do not miss him, and I cannot pretend to. He made his choices and I made mine." "Your choice brought you to me," Ethan said, pulling her into his arms. "So I cannot be entirely sorry for how things turned out, even if I am sorry for the pain he caused you." She hugged him tightly. "Neither can I." In the summer of 1900, Samuel married Alice Morrison in a beautiful ceremony at the church in Lone Pine. The entire town turned out to celebrate, and Ethan looked at his son with a mixture of pride and nostalgia. Samuel was 20 now, a man grown, though it seemed like only yesterday he had been a baby in Theodora's arms. Alice was a lovely young woman, kind and hardworking, and she fit seamlessly into the Lancaster family. She and Samuel built a small cabin on the far end of the ranch property, and Samuel continued to work alongside his father, now as a full partner in the operation rather than just a helper. Grace, at 16, was preparing to attend the normal school in Bishop to obtain her teaching certificate. It would mean being away from home for extended periods, and Theodora struggled with the idea of her daughter leaving, even as she was proud of Grace's ambition and determination. "I will miss you terribly," Theodora said as she helped Grace pack her trunk. "I will miss you too, Mama," Grace replied, hugging her mother tightly. "But you taught me that I could be anything I wanted to be, that I had a choice in how I lived my life. This is my choice and I need you to support it." Theodora smiled through her tears. "I do support it. I am so proud of you, Grace. You are going to be a wonderful teacher." Daniel, at 14, was content to remain on the ranch for now, though he harbored dreams of perhaps traveling and playing music someday. Ethan and Theodora assured him that whatever path he chose, they would support him. As the new century dawned, Ethan and Theodora found themselves in their early 40s, watching their children step into adulthood and begin building lives of their own. It was bittersweet, this letting go, but it was also deeply satisfying to see the strong, capable, compassionate people their children had become. In 1902, Samuel and Alice had their first child, a little girl they named Clara. Ethan and Theodora became grandparents, and they embraced the role with joy. Clara was a bright-eyed baby who looked remarkably like Grace had at that age, and Theodora spent hours rocking her and singing the same lullabies she had sung to her own children. Grace completed her teaching certificate and returned to Lone Pine to teach at the expanded school that now occupied its own building. She boarded with Martha and David Chen, who had become like second parents to her, and she threw herself into her work with passion and dedication. Daniel, at 18, decided to spend a year traveling to nearby towns and cities, playing his guitar and experiencing life beyond the valley. It was hard for Ethan and Theodora to let him go, but they understood his need to explore and discover who he was outside of the family ranch. "He will come back," Ethan assured Theodora as they waved goodbye to Daniel. "This is his home. He just needs to see what else is out there to appreciate it fully." He was right. Daniel returned a year later, more mature and confident, with stories of his travels and a collection of new songs he had learned and written. He announced his intention to start a small music program at the school, teaching children the basics of music, and Grace enthusiastically helped him get it set up. In 1905, Grace met a young rancher named Robert Harrison who had recently moved to the area. He was quiet and hardworking, with a gentle manner that won over the entire Lancaster family. Grace and Robert's courtship was brief but sincere, and they married in the autumn of that year. Unlike Samuel, who had built on the family ranch, Robert had his own spread about 10 miles south, and Grace moved there with him after the wedding. Theodora cried as she watched her daughter ride away in the wagon, though they were happy tears. Both of her children were settled and happy, building lives with partners they had chosen for themselves. It was everything she had hoped for them, this freedom to make their own choices and follow their own hearts. Daniel, at 21, surprised everyone by falling in love with Anna Chen, Martha and David's youngest daughter. Anna was a talented seamstress who had taken over much of the work at the general store, and she and Daniel had known each other all their lives. But it was only recently that friendship had blossomed into something deeper. Ethan and Theodora were delighted by the match. Martha and David had been dear friends for over 2 decades, and the idea of their families being officially united was wonderful. Daniel and Anna were married in a simple ceremony in 1907, and they built a small house in town, with Daniel teaching music and Anna running the store with her aging parents. As Ethan and Theodora entered their 50s, they found themselves with a nearly empty nest for the first time in decades. Samuel and Alice now had 3 children and were busy with their own growing family. Grace and Robert had 2 daughters and were talking about building a bigger house. Daniel and Anna had just welcomed their first child, a boy named Ethan after his grandfather. "We are old," Theodora said one evening, though there was no sadness in her voice, only a kind of wonder. "We are," Ethan agreed, pulling her close on the porch swing he had built years ago. "But we have lived well, my love. Look at everything we have built together." 3 children, all of them happy and settled. Grandchildren who bring us joy every day. This ranch, this community, this life we have created. "Do you have any regrets?" Theodora asked. Ethan was quiet for a moment, considering. "None that matter," he finally said. "There are things I might have done differently, risks I might have taken or not taken. But every choice I made led me to this moment, sitting here with you, surrounded by the family we created and the life we built. How could I regret any of that?" Theodora smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "I have no regrets either. Even the hard parts, even the pain and fear and uncertainty of those early days, they were all worth it to get here. I would go through it all again in a heartbeat." They sat together as the sun set over the Sierra Nevada, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and pink. The same mountains where the storm had come from all those years ago, the storm that had brought them together. The same valley where they had built their life, raised their children, found their happiness. In the years that followed, they settled into the comfortable rhythm of later life. The ranch was largely run by Samuel now, with Ethan serving more as an advisor than a daily worker. He and Theodora took more time to travel, visiting their children and grandchildren, taking trips to San Francisco and even once to Los Angeles. They had the freedom now that their children were grown, but they always returned gratefully to Lone Pine, to the house that had been their home for over 3 decades. Theodora continued to be involved with the school, though she had turned over most of the teaching duties to younger instructors. She served on the town council and was instrumental in establishing a small library in a building next to the church. Her dream of education and learning for all had expanded beyond her own classroom to benefit the entire community. The grandchildren multiplied. By 1915, Ethan and Theodora had 12 grandchildren ranging from infants to teenagers, and they loved each one fiercely. The ranch house was frequently filled with children's laughter, and holidays were raucous affairs with 3 generations gathered around the large table Ethan had built to accommodate everyone. On a quiet evening in the spring of 1918, as Ethan and Theodora sat on their porch watching the sunset, a ritual they had performed thousands of times over the years, Ethan took his wife's hand. "You remember what I said to you the night I proposed?" he asked. Theodora smiled, her face lined now with age but still beautiful to him. "Every word. You said you loved the sound of my laugh and that I was not afraid to speak my mind. You said you loved my courage and kindness. You said you had been falling in love with me since you found me in the barn." "All still true," Ethan said softly. 36 years of marriage and I love you more now than I did then. I did not think that was possible, but it is." "I love you too," Theodora replied, squeezing his hand. "You have been my partner, my best friend, my great love. You gave me the life I dreamed of but never thought I could have. You gave me choice and freedom and unconditional love." "We gave those things to each other," Ethan corrected. They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching as the stars began to appear. Behind them, through the open window, they could hear Samuel and Alice visiting with their grown children, their voices a pleasant murmur. Grace and Robert would be arriving tomorrow with their family for a spring gathering, and Daniel and Anna were bringing their 3 children from town. "Our lives turned out pretty well, did they not?" Theodora said with a soft laugh. "They turned out perfectly," Ethan replied. "From that night in the blizzard to right now, every moment has been worth it. The hard times made the good times sweeter, and the good times have far outnumbered the bad." He turned to look at her, this woman who had stumbled into his barn and into his heart all those years ago. "Thank you, Theodora. Thank you for choosing me, for building this life with me, for loving me through all of it." "Thank you," she replied, tears shining in her eyes. "Thank you for finding me. Thank you for bringing me inside, not just into your house but into your life. Thank you for seeing me, for valuing me, for making me your partner in everything." As the evening deepened and the air grew cool, they went inside together, arms around each other's waists, moving with the ease of long familiarity. The fire was burning in the hearth, much as it had been that first night, and they settled in their favorite chairs, simply enjoying each other's presence. Their story had begun with a storm and a desperate woman seeking shelter. It had grown into something neither of them could have imagined that night, a love that had endured and deepened, a family that had spread and flourished, a life that had been full of purpose and joy and meaning. Outside, snow began to fall gently, dusting the ranch with white. But inside, the house was warm and bright, filled with love and laughter and the legacy of 2 people who had found each other in the wilderness and chosen to build something beautiful together. Ethan looked at Theodora across the space that separated their chairs, and she smiled at him, that same smile that had captured his heart decades ago. Tomorrow would bring new joys and challenges, visits with children and grandchildren, work to be done and plans to be made. But tonight, they simply sat together in the home they had built, grateful for the life they had created and the love that had sustained them through it all. The cowboy who had found a shivering woman in his barn had gained so much more than a wife. He had found his other half, his partner, his great love, and the woman who had fled into a blizzard seeking freedom had found not just safety but a home in every sense of the word. A place where she belonged, where she was cherished, where she could be fully herself. Their love story, which had begun in the cold and dark of a winter storm, had bloomed into something warm and lasting and infinitely precious. It was a testament to the power of kindness, the strength of commitment, and the transformative nature of love freely given and received. As the years continued to pass, and their children's children had children of their own, the story of how Ethan and Theodora met became family legend. The grandchildren and great-grandchildren would beg to hear it again and again, never tiring of the romance of it, of the idea that their family had begun with such a dramatic and fateful meeting. In 1925, Ethan and Theodora celebrated their 43rd wedding anniversary surrounded by 4 generations of family. The gathering was held at the ranch, now operated primarily by Samuel's oldest son, Thomas, though Samuel and Ethan both still helped when they could. Tables were set up outside under the shade of the cottonwoods, laden with food brought by various family members. Children of all ages ran and played, their shouts echoing across the valley. As Ethan looked around at the sea of faces, at the descendants of his union with Theodora, he felt overwhelming gratitude. They had created this, he and his beloved wife. Not just children, but an entire family tree that was still growing and branching. Each person here was a testament to the love that had started in his barn on a winter night so long ago. Theodora sat beside him in a comfortable chair someone had brought out for her. She was 73 now, her dark hair turned silver, her green eyes dimmed slightly by age but still bright with intelligence and warmth. Ethan, at 76, moved more slowly than he once had, but he was still strong and sharp-minded. "What are you thinking about?" Theodora asked, reaching over to take his hand. "About how lucky I am," Ethan replied simply. "About how one decision to check on my horses during a blizzard changed the entire course of my life. About how close I came to never meeting you." "But you did check on the horses," Theodora said with a smile. "And you did find me. And we did build all of this together. That is what matters. Not the what-ifs, but what actually happened." "You are right, as always," Ethan said, raising her hand to his lips and kissing it gently. Their youngest grandchild, Grace's daughter Emma, approached them shyly, holding something behind her back. She was 7 years old, with dark curls and green eyes that reminded Ethan painfully of Theodora as a young woman. "Grandma Theodora, Grandpa Ethan," Emma said sweetly. "We made something for you." She brought out a large sheet of paper that had clearly been worked on by many small hands. It was covered in drawings and messages from all the grandchildren and great-grandchildren, a collage of love and appreciation. In the center, drawn with surprising skill by one of the older children, was a picture of a small barn with snow falling around it and 2 figures inside. "It is the story of how you met," Emma explained. "Everyone loves that story. We wanted to make you something special." Theodora's eyes filled with tears as she looked at the paper, at the evidence of how much their story meant to the family they had created. "It is beautiful, Emma. Thank you so much. Thank everyone for us." Emma beamed and ran off to rejoin the other children. Ethan and Theodora looked at the picture together, both transported back to that night. That scared, frozen girl in the barn had no idea what her life was going to become, Theodora said softly. And the lonely cowboy who found her had no idea his life was about to begin, Ethan added. They sat together as the celebration continued around them, holding hands and watching their family. Samuel was laughing with his brothers-in-law Robert and David, the 3 men having formed a close bond over the years. Alice and Grace were supervising food preparation along with Anna and several of the granddaughters-in-law. The children played games organized by some of the older grandchildren. It was chaos, and it was noisy, and it was absolutely perfect. As the sun began to set, someone suggested that Daniel play some music. He retrieved his guitar, the same one Ethan had bought for him as a boy, now worn but still producing beautiful sounds. Daniel played and sang, his voice rich and sure, and soon others joined in. The singing carried across the valley as darkness fell and lanterns were lit, creating a warm glow. Ethan stood and offered his hand to Theodora. "Dance with me," she laughed. "We are too old for dancing." "We are never too old for dancing," he insisted, and she allowed him to pull her to her feet. They moved slowly to the music, barely more than swaying in place, but it did not matter. They were together, surrounded by the family they had created and the love they had nurtured for over 4 decades. Some of the grandchildren watched them with sentimental smiles, and several other couples joined them, creating a gentle scene of love across generations. When the song ended, Ethan and Theodora remained in their embrace for a long moment. "I would do it all again," Theodora whispered. "Every single moment just to end up here with you." "As would I," Ethan replied. "You are my home, Theodora. You always have been." The celebration continued late into the night, but eventually families began packing up to head back to their own homes. Samuel and his family stayed to help clean up, and then they too departed, leaving Ethan and Theodora alone in the quiet house. They prepared for bed in the comfortable silence of long married couples, each knowing instinctively what the other needed. As they lay together in the bed they had shared for over 40 years, Ethan pulled Theodora close. "You think we will have many more years together?" she asked quietly. "I hope so," Ethan replied honestly. "But however long we have, we will make the most of it, just as we always have." "Promise me something," Theodora said. "Anything. Promise me that when one of us goes, the other will not stop living, that we will remember each other with joy, not sadness, that we will be grateful for the time we had rather than bitter about what we have lost." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "That is a hard promise to make. I cannot imagine this world without you in it." "And I cannot imagine it without you," Theodora replied. "But we both know that day will come eventually. And when it does, I want us to face it with the same courage and grace that we have faced everything else in our lives. Can you promise me that?" "I promise," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. "I will try my best to honor your memory by continuing to live fully, by cherishing our family, by remembering our love as the gift it was and is." "That is all I can ask," Theodora said, and she kissed him softly. They fell asleep in each other's arms as they had thousands of times before, each grateful for another day together. The years that followed were gentle ones. Ethan and Theodora continued to live at the ranch, though they left more and more of the daily operations to the younger generation. They spent their days reading, taking short walks, receiving visits from family, and simply enjoying each other's company. They had earned this peaceful time, this season of rest after decades of hard work. In the spring of 1928, Theodora's health began to decline. It started with small things, fatigue and occasional confusion, but gradually progressed to something more serious. The doctor from Bishop came and examined her, speaking in low tones with Ethan about heart failure and the natural progression of age. There was little that could be done except to keep her comfortable and make sure she was not in pain. Theodora faced her failing health with characteristic grace and practicality. She made sure all her affairs were in order, that Ethan knew where everything was and how to manage without her. She wrote letters to each of her children and grandchildren, to be opened after her death, telling them how much she loved them and how proud she was of the people they had become. "I am not afraid," she told Ethan one afternoon as they sat together on the porch. "I have lived a full and beautiful life. I have been loved and I have loved in return. I have seen my children grow and my grandchildren flourish. I have no regrets." "I am afraid," Ethan admitted. "I am terrified of losing you, of facing even one day without you by my side." "You will not be alone," Theodora said gently. "You have our children, our grandchildren, and you will carry me in your heart as I will carry you in mine wherever I go." On a warm June evening, with the windows open and a gentle breeze carrying the scent of wildflowers into the room, Theodora passed away peacefully in her sleep. Ethan was holding her hand, as he had held it countless times over their 45 years of marriage. One moment she was breathing, the next she simply was not, the transition so gentle it took him a moment to realize she was gone. He sat with her for a long time, tears streaming down his face, holding her hand and telling her all the things he had said 1,000 times before but needed to say once more. That he loved her, that she had been his everything, that she had made his life worth living, that he was grateful for every moment they had shared. When Samuel arrived the next morning for his regular visit, he found his father still sitting beside his mother's body, exhausted and grief-stricken but calm. Samuel gently helped him up and embraced him, and together they began the difficult task of notifying the rest of the family. The funeral was held 3 days later, and it seemed like the entire town of Lone Pine turned out to pay their respects. Theodora had touched so many lives through her teaching, her kindness, her quiet strength. The church was filled to overflowing, and people stood outside to listen as Reverend Thomas, now elderly himself but still serving the community, spoke about Theodora's legacy. Ethan sat in the front pew, surrounded by his children and grandchildren, listening as person after person stood to share memories of Theodora. Stories of how she had taught them to read, how she had welcomed them to town, how she had offered comfort during difficult times. Each story was a thread in the tapestry of the life she had lived, and Ethan felt both pride and overwhelming sadness at all that had been lost. At the graveside, as they lowered Theodora's casket into the ground in the small cemetery on a hill overlooking the valley, Ethan finally broke down. He wept openly, his children holding him up as he said his final goodbye to the woman who had been his partner, his love, his everything for 45 years. In the weeks and months that followed, Ethan struggled with the emptiness left by Theodora's absence. The house felt too quiet, too large. Everything reminded him of her. The books on the shelf that she had read over and over, the quilt on the bed that she had sewn, the chair where she had sat each evening. He found himself setting 2 plates at meals before remembering she was gone. He would turn to tell her something, only to face empty air. But he had made her a promise, and he was determined to keep it. He forced himself to get up each morning, to eat, to go outside. His children visited frequently, bringing grandchildren and great-grandchildren, filling the house with noise and life. He attended family gatherings and town events, even though everything felt muted without Theodora by his side. Slowly, painfully, he learned to carry his grief while still living. He learned to smile at memories instead of only crying at them. He began to tell stories about Theodora to the younger grandchildren and great-grandchildren who had only vague memories of her, ensuring that her legacy would continue. He found comfort in knowing that she lived on through their descendants, that pieces of her personality and values and spirit could be seen in each of them. 2 years after Theodora's death, on a cold December night, Ethan woke suddenly from a dream. In it, he had been young again, walking through the snow to his barn to check on his horses. He had found Theodora there, young and beautiful and whole, and she had smiled at him with those green eyes that had captured his heart so completely. "I have been waiting for you," Dream Theodora had said. Ethan lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling in the darkness, and he felt a deep sense of peace settle over him. He was 81 years old. He had lived a good life, a full life. He had loved and been loved. He had raised 3 children and watched them raise children of their own. He had built something lasting and meaningful. But he was tired. Tired of the loneliness, tired of the empty house, tired of the constant ache in his chest where Theodora's presence used to be. He missed her with an intensity that had not diminished in 2 years. And if she was waiting for him, as she had been in his dream, then perhaps it was time to go to her. He closed his eyes, thinking of that night so long ago when he had found her in his barn. How scared she had been, how fragile. How he had brought her inside and into his life, never imagining the journey they would take together. He thought of their wedding day, of the births of their children, of countless evenings on the porch watching sunsets. He thought of her smile, her laugh, the way she had looked at him even after decades of marriage as though he was everything she had ever wanted. "I am coming, my love," he whispered into the darkness. "Wait for me." When Samuel came by the next morning for his daily visit, he found his father had passed away peacefully in his sleep. His face was calm, almost smiling, and Samuel knew instinctively that Ethan had gone to join Theodora, that they were together again as they were always meant to be. They buried Ethan beside Theodora on the hill, overlooking the valley they had both loved. The entire family gathered once more, spanning 4 generations now, all of them products of the love that had begun on a snowy night in 1882. As they stood together, Samuel spoke about his parents, about the legacy they had left. "Our father found our mother in his barn during a blizzard," Samuel said, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd. "He brought her inside, into his house and into his life. And from that single act of kindness, of compassion, of love, all of us are here. Every person standing here today exists because a cowboy decided to check on his horses during a storm, and because he chose to help a woman who desperately needed it." He gestured at the two graves, side by side. They built something beautiful together, a marriage that lasted 45 years, a family that continues to grow and flourish, a legacy of love and kindness and dedication. They showed us what it means to choose each other every day, to build a life together through good times and bad, to love unconditionally and without reservation. Samuel's voice broke with emotion. They are together now, wherever they are. And we carry them with us in our hearts, in our values, in the way we love our own families. That is their true legacy. Not just the ranch or the family name, but the love that started it all and that continues in each of us. As the family dispersed, returning to their various homes across the valley and beyond, they carried with them the story of Ethan and Theodora Lancaster, the cowboy and the woman he found shivering in his barn. The love that had grown from a desperate moment in a blizzard into something that would last for generations. Years passed, and then decades. The ranch continued to be operated by Lancaster descendants, each generation adding their own chapter to the story, while honoring the foundation that Ethan and Theodora had built. The original ranch house was preserved and maintained, treated with reverence as the birthplace of the family. The story of how Ethan and Theodora met became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. Children grew up hearing about the blizzard, the barn, the cowboy who brought the shivering woman inside and into his life. They learned about love and kindness and the importance of helping those in need. They learned that sometimes the worst storms lead to the best outcomes, that courage and compassion can change the course of lives, that true love is built on respect and partnership and choice. On the hill overlooking the valley, two headstones stood side by side, weathered by time but still standing strong. Ethan Lancaster and Theodora Parker Lancaster, their names carved in stone along with their dates and a simple inscription chosen by their children. Together in life, together in eternity. And if you stood on that hill on a quiet evening, as the sun set over the Sierra Nevada and painted the sky in brilliant colors, you could almost imagine you heard echoes of laughter and music drifting on the wind. The legacy of a love that had begun in darkness and cold, but had blazed bright and warm for a lifetime, illuminating the path for all who came after. A reminder that the greatest journeys often begin with a single act of kindness, and that true love, once found, never truly ends.